The sound of her voice cut through the dawn like silver thread through silk, and Samuel Stone knew in that instant, before he even opened his eyes, that he would spend the rest of his life chasing that melody. He had been married to Sarah Ashford for 3 years now, and every morning since their wedding day in the autumn of 1878, she sang to the sunrise. It was a habit she had learned from her grandmother, who had learned it from her grandmother before that. A tradition passed down through generations of women who believed that greeting the morning with song brought blessings upon the household. Samuel had never been a religious man, but listening to his wife's voice floating across their small ranch outside Cody, Wyoming, he figured there might be something to those old beliefs after all. The bedroom was still dim, the first rays of sunlight just beginning to creep through the cotton curtains Sarah had sewn herself. Samuel could see her silhouette standing by the window, her long dark hair loose down her back, still wearing her white nightgown. She was singing an old hymn, something about rivers and valleys and finding peace in the wilderness. Her voice was clear and pure, untrained but beautiful in its honesty, and it made something in Samuel's chest tighten with an emotion he could barely name. He stayed perfectly still, not wanting to disturb her, watching the way the growing light began to paint golden edges around her figure. 3 years. 3 years of waking up to this, and yet this morning it felt different somehow. This morning, watching her sing to the dawn, Samuel felt like he was falling in love all over again, tumbling headfirst into something deep and endless and true. When Sarah finished her song, she turned from the window and found him watching her. A smile spread across her face, soft and knowing. "How long have you been awake?" she asked, moving toward the bed. "Long enough," Samuel said, his voice rough with sleep. He reached for her hand as she sat down beside him. "Long enough to remember why I am the luckiest man in Wyoming." Sarah laughed, a sound as bright as her morning song. "You say that every day, because it is true every day." He pulled her closer, and she did not resist, settling against him with the easy comfort of long familiarity. "Will you ever tell me why you sing to the morning?" "I have told you. It was my grandmother's tradition." "No. I mean, why do you really do it? What does it mean to you?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, and Samuel could feel her thinking, choosing her words carefully the way she always did when something mattered. "When I sing to the morning," she said finally, "I am reminding myself that we get another day, another chance. The night is over and we are still here, still together, and that is worth celebrating, every single time." Samuel felt that tightness in his chest again. He had known Sarah was special when he first met her in the spring of 1875, working at her father's general store in town. She had been 20 years old then, quick with numbers and quicker with a smile, and she had made him tongue-tied and clumsy in a way no other woman ever had. He had been 23, freshly returned from working cattle drives down south, trying to save enough money to buy a piece of land and start his own ranch. He had walked into that store to buy tobacco and walked out with a heart full of hope and determination. It had taken him 3 years to save enough money, 3 years of hard work and careful planning, 3 years of courting Sarah Ashford whenever he could steal a few hours in town. When he finally bought this land, 200 acres of good grazing ground with a creek running through it and mountains rising up in the distance, the first thing he did was ride back to town and ask her father for permission to marry her. The wedding had been small, just family and a few close friends, held in the church on a crisp October afternoon. Sarah had worn her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit her smaller frame, and Samuel had worn the only suit he owned, cleaned and pressed until it looked almost new. When the preacher pronounced them man and wife, Samuel had kissed her in front of God and everyone, and he had felt like the richest man alive. Now, lying in bed with the morning light growing stronger, Samuel ran his fingers through Sarah's hair and thought about all the days they had shared since then. The hard days, when the work seemed endless and the money ran short. The good days, when the cattle were healthy and the grass was green and they could sit on the porch together and watch the sun set behind the mountains. The quiet days when nothing much happened except the two of them living their lives side by side, learning each other's rhythms and habits and dreams. "I love you," he said, because it was the only thing that seemed adequate in that moment. "I love you too," Sarah replied, and then she kissed him, soft and sweet, before pulling away with a practical sigh. But the chickens still need feeding, and the cow still needs milking, and loving each other does not make the chores do themselves. Samuel groaned but sat up, knowing she was right. Ranch life did not allow for long mornings in bed, no matter how much a man might want to stay wrapped up with his wife. There was always work to be done. They dressed quickly, Sarah in her simple work dress and apron, Samuel in his worn trousers and shirt. Together they headed outside into the cool morning air. The ranch was small by most standards, just a cabin, a barn, a chicken coop, and enough land to run about 50 head of cattle. It was not much, but it was theirs, built with their own hands and their own sweat, and Samuel was proud of every inch of it. While Sarah went to tend the chickens, Samuel headed to the barn to milk their cow, a gentle old girl named Bessie who had been with them since the beginning. The rhythmic sound of milk hitting the bucket was soothing, almost meditative, and Samuel let his mind wander as he worked. He thought about Sarah's words, about greeting each morning with gratitude. It was a good philosophy, he decided. Too many people spent their time chasing what they did not have instead of appreciating what they did. Samuel knew men in town who had more land, more cattle, more money, but he would not trade places with any of them. Not when it meant giving up mornings like this, mornings that started with Sarah's voice singing to the dawn. When he finished with Bessie, he carried the milk bucket back to the cabin. Sarah was already inside, starting breakfast on the cast-iron stove. The smell of coffee and bacon filled the small space, and Samuel felt his stomach rumble with hunger. "Thaddeus Rourke stopped by yesterday while you were out checking the north fence," Sarah said as she cracked eggs into a pan. "He wanted to know if you would be interested in joining a poker game in town tonight." Samuel poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down at the table. Thaddeus Rourke was a neighbor, a bachelor who owned the ranch to the west of theirs. He was a good man, honest and hardworking, though perhaps a bit too fond of cards and whiskey. "What did you tell him?" "I told him you would think about it." Sarah brought plates of food to the table and sat down across from him. "You have been working hard lately. It might do you good to spend an evening with friends." Samuel studied his wife's face, looking for any sign that she minded the idea of him going to town without her. But Sarah's expression was open and genuine, no trace of resentment or worry. "Would you mind if I went?" he asked. "Of course not. You should go. Enjoy yourself." She reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "Just do not lose all our money," Samuel laughed. "I will do my best." They ate breakfast together, talking about the day's work ahead. The cattle needed to be moved to fresh grazing, and there was a section of fence that needed mending. Sarah wanted to work in her vegetable garden, trying to coax the last of the summer crop before the first frost came. It was ordinary conversation, the kind married couples had every day, but Samuel found himself paying attention to every word, every gesture, every smile Sarah gave him. Falling in love all over again, he realized, was not about grand gestures or dramatic moments. It was about noticing the small things you had started to take for granted. The way Sarah wrinkled her nose when she was thinking hard about something. The way she always saved the last bite of bacon for him, even though he knew it was her favorite. The way she looked at him like he was someone worth looking at. After breakfast, Samuel headed out to work with the cattle while Sarah stayed behind to tackle her own chores. The morning was clear and bright, the kind of perfect late summer day that made a man grateful to be alive. Samuel rode his horse, a sturdy bay gelding named Chief, out to where the small herd was grazing. The cattle were doing well, fat and healthy, and Samuel allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. This winter, if all went well, he might be able to afford to buy another 10 or 15 head, slowly building the herd until the ranch could support them more comfortably. He spent the morning moving the cattle to a fresh pasture and checking them over for any signs of illness or injury. It was hot work, even in the cooling temperatures of late August, and by the time he headed back toward the cabin for the midday meal, he was sweating and hungry. Sarah had lunch ready when he arrived, cold chicken and fresh bread with butter. They ate on the porch, enjoying the slight breeze that had picked up. "I was thinking," Sarah said slowly, in the tone she used when she had been working through an idea, "that we might want to consider getting a few pigs." Samuel raised his eyebrows. "Pigs for meat. And they could help clear some of that rough ground behind the barn. We could build a pen pretty easily, and they would not cost much to feed if we supplement with table scraps and garden waste." It was a good idea, practical and sensible, exactly the kind of thinking that made Sarah such a good ranch wife. Samuel nodded, considering. "We would need to build a strong pen. Pigs can be clever about getting out." "I know, but I think we could manage it. Maybe in the spring, after we get through the winter and see where we stand financially." "Spring sounds good," Samuel agreed. He loved these conversations, loved planning their future together, dreaming about what their little ranch might become. After lunch, Samuel rode out to mend the fence line while Sarah returned to her garden. The afternoon passed in steady work, and when Samuel finally headed back to the cabin as the sun began to lower in the sky, he was tired but satisfied with what he had accomplished. He found Sarah in the kitchen, preparing supper. She had changed out of her work dress into something a bit nicer, a blue cotton dress that brought out the color of her eyes. "You are still planning to go to town tonight?" she asked. Samuel had almost forgotten about Thaddeus's invitation, caught up in the day's work. "I suppose so, if you truly do not mind." "I do not mind. Go, have fun. Just be careful riding home in the dark." Samuel washed up and changed into clean clothes, then sat down to eat the supper Sarah had prepared. She had made his favorite beef stew with vegetables from her garden, thick and savory and perfect for a cool evening. "This is delicious," Samuel said, and meant it. "I am glad you like it." Sarah smiled at him across the table. "There will be plenty left for tomorrow." After supper, Samuel saddled Chief again and prepared to ride into town. Sarah walked out with him, and before he mounted up, she stood on her toes and kissed him. "Come home safe," she said. "Always," Samuel promised. The ride to Cody took about 40 minutes, following the wagon road that wound through the valley. The town was small but growing, built up around the railroad that had come through a few years back. Samuel could remember when there had been nothing here but wilderness, but now there were stores and saloons, a church and a school, houses and hotels. Progress, people called it, though Samuel was not entirely sure it was always a good thing. He found Thaddeus at the Silver Dollar Saloon, along with 3 other men Samuel knew from around the area. Jacob Fisher, who owned the livery stable, Martin Cross, who worked as a blacksmith, and Dennis Howard, a rancher who had been in the territory longer than just about anyone. "Samuel," Thaddeus called out when he spotted him. "I was beginning to think you would not show." "Sarah practically pushed me out the door," Samuel said with a grin, settling into a chair at their table. The evening passed pleasantly enough. Samuel was not much of a gambler, but he enjoyed the company and the conversation. The men talked about cattle prices and weather predictions, about politics and local gossip. Someone bought a round of whiskey, and then another. Samuel kept his drinking moderate, remembering his promise to Sarah to come home safe. Around 10 o'clock, Dennis Howard mentioned that he had heard rumors about rustlers operating in the area to the south. "Lost 3 head last week," Dennis said, his weathered face grim. "Tracks led off toward the mountains, but I could not follow far enough to catch up with them." "You report it to the sheriff?" Jacob asked. "For all the good it will do. Sheriff Mitchell has his hands full in town. He does not have time to go chasing cattle thieves through the wilderness." Samuel felt a flicker of concern. 3 head was a significant loss for any rancher, but for someone like Dennis, who was getting on in years and running his ranch mostly alone, it could be devastating. "Maybe we should organize patrols," Thaddeus suggested. "Take turns watching over each other's herds." "That is not a bad idea," Martin said. "Safety in numbers and all that." They discussed the possibility for a while, but nothing concrete was decided. Eventually, the conversation drifted to other topics and the poker game continued. Samuel found himself winning more often than losing, and by the time he decided to head home around midnight, he was actually a few dollars ahead. "Give Sarah my regards," Thaddeus said as Samuel prepared to leave. "I will. You boys stay out of trouble." The ride home was peaceful, the night air cool and fresh, the stars bright overhead. Chief knew the way and needed little guidance, leaving Samuel free to think. He thought about the rustler problem, wondering if it would spread north to their area. He thought about Sarah's idea to get pigs in the spring. Mostly, though, he thought about that morning, about waking up to her singing and feeling like he was falling in love all over again. When he reached the ranch, the cabin was dark, Sarah already asleep. Samuel quietly tended to Chief, unsaddling him and making sure he had water and feed before heading inside. He undressed in the dark, trying not to wake Sarah, and slipped into bed beside her. She stirred slightly, turning toward him. "You are home," she murmured, still half asleep. "I am home," Samuel confirmed, wrapping his arms around her. "Did you win?" "A little." "Good." She nestled against him, her breathing already evening out as she drifted back to sleep. Samuel lay awake for a while longer, holding his wife, listening to the quiet sounds of the night outside. This was what mattered, he thought. Not the poker games or the work or even the ranch itself. This. Having someone to come home to, someone who cared whether you made it back safe, someone whose voice greeted the morning with song. He fell asleep with that thought and slept deeply and well. The next morning, Samuel woke before Sarah for once. He lay still, watching her sleep in the growing dawn light, studying the curve of her cheek and the dark fan of her eyelashes against her skin. She looked so peaceful, so beautiful, and Samuel felt that overwhelming rush of love again, even stronger than yesterday. When Sarah's eyes finally opened, she found him watching her and smiled. "Good morning," she said softly. "Good morning. Why are you looking at me like that?" "Like what?" "Like I am something precious." "Because you are," Samuel said simply. Sarah's smile widened and she reached up to touch his face. "You are in a strange mood lately." "Is it strange to appreciate my own wife?" "No, but you have been extra appreciative. Not that I am complaining." Samuel kissed her, slow and tender, pouring all the emotions he could not quite name into that single gesture. When they finally pulled apart, Sarah was flushed and breathing a little faster. "I should sing to the morning more often if this is the effect it has on you," she teased. They got up and started their day, falling into the familiar routine of ranch work. But throughout the day, Samuel found himself stopping to watch Sarah, to really see her in a way he realized he had not done in a while. It was easy, he discovered, to get so caught up in the daily grind that you forgot to notice the person working beside you. But once you started paying attention again, really paying attention, it was like falling in love all over again. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set, Samuel took Sarah's hand. "I have been thinking," he said. "About what? About us. About how lucky I am." Sarah squeezed his hand. "What brought this on?" Samuel tried to find the words to explain. "Yesterday morning when I woke up to you singing, something just hit me. How much I love you. How much you mean to me. And I realized I had been taking it for granted, taking you for granted. Not in a bad way, just in the way people do when they get comfortable. But I do not want to do that anymore. I want to appreciate every day we have together." Sarah was quiet for a long moment, and when Samuel looked at her, he saw tears glistening in her eyes. "That is the sweetest thing anyone has ever said to me," she whispered. "It is the truth." She leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat together in comfortable silence, watching the sky turn orange and pink and purple as the sun disappeared behind the mountains. "Samuel," Sarah said eventually, her voice tentative, "there is something I need to tell you." Samuel felt a jolt of concern at her tone. "What is it? Is something wrong?" "No, nothing is wrong. At least, I hope you will not think so." She took a deep breath. "I am with child." For a moment, Samuel could not process the words. Then understanding crashed over him like a wave, and he pulled back to look at Sarah's face. "You are pregnant?" he asked, wanting to be absolutely sure he had heard correctly. Sarah nodded, biting her lower lip nervously. "I have suspected for a few weeks now, but I wanted to be certain before I told you. I am certain now." "We are going to have a baby," Samuel said, and then he laughed, loud and joyous, and pulled Sarah into his arms. "We are going to have a baby." Sarah laughed too, relief and happiness mixing in the sound. "So you are pleased?" "Pleased. Sarah, I am over the moon. This is wonderful news. The best news." He kissed her again, then placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "When?" "I think sometime in March or April." "It is hard to know exactly." Samuel's mind was already racing ahead, thinking about all the things they would need to do. Fix up the cabin, build a cradle, make sure they had enough supplies put away for when Sarah could not work as hard. But mostly he just felt an overwhelming sense of joy and rightness. A baby. Their baby. "This explains why you have been so emotional," Sarah said with a small smile. "I have not been emotional. Samuel, you have been looking at me like I hung the moon for the past 2 days. That has nothing to do with you being pregnant. I did not even know until just now." But even as he said it, Samuel wondered if maybe on some level he had sensed the change in her, in their lives. Maybe that was why he had been feeling this renewed sense of love and appreciation. They stayed up late that night, talking about the future, about names they liked and how they would arrange the cabin to make room for a baby. Sarah told him about how she had been feeling, the slight nausea in the mornings, the tiredness that seemed to come over her in the afternoons. Samuel listened to every word, amazed and humbled by the idea that Sarah's body was growing their child. "I am a little scared," Sarah admitted as they lay in bed. "My mother had such a hard time when my younger brother was born. She nearly died." Samuel held her closer, feeling a shadow of fear creep into his joy. Childbirth was dangerous, he knew that. Women died from it all the time, even strong, healthy women like Sarah. "We will take every precaution," he promised. "We will get the doctor from town when your time comes. We will make sure you have everything you need, and you are strong, Sarah, stronger than you know. I hope you are right. I am right. You are going to be fine, and our baby is going to be fine, and we are going to be a family." Sarah kissed him softly. "I love you, Samuel Stone." "I love you too, Sarah Stone." More than I can ever say." Over the next few weeks, Samuel found himself even more aware of Sarah, more protective, more attentive. He insisted she not lift anything too heavy or work too hard in the garden. Sarah tolerated his fussing with good humor, though she insisted she was not fragile. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time," she reminded him when he tried to take over mucking out the chicken coop. "I am not made of glass, I know that, but humor me anyway." The news of Sarah's pregnancy seemed to make everything on the ranch feel more important, more meaningful. Samuel worked harder than ever, determined to make sure they were well prepared for the arrival of their child. He repaired every loose board in the cabin, replaced the roof where it had started to leak, chopped enough firewood to last them through 2 winters instead of 1. In September, the first hints of autumn began to appear. The aspen trees in the mountains turned gold and the air grew crisp and cool. Sarah's pregnancy was starting to show now, a small but definite curve to her belly that made Samuel's heart swell with pride and love every time he saw it. One morning in late September, Samuel woke to Sarah's singing as usual. But this time, instead of staying in bed, he got up and went to stand beside her at the window, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his hands on her growing belly. "Good morning," Sarah said, leaning back against him. "Good morning." Samuel pressed a kiss to her temple. "What were you singing about today?" "About new beginnings. About hope and promise and the future." "Fitting," Samuel said. They stood together watching the sun rise, and Samuel thought about how much his life had changed in just a few short weeks. Not in the obvious ways, nothing external had really shifted, but everything internal had transformed. He had rediscovered the love he had always had for Sarah, remembered why he had fallen for her in the first place, and found new depths to those feelings he had not known existed. "What are you thinking about?" Sarah asked. "About how I woke up one morning and fell in love with you all over again." "Just one morning?" "Well, it started one morning, when you were singing, and then it just kept growing and growing until I felt like my heart might burst from it." Sarah turned in his arms to face him. "You really are being very romantic lately." "Is that a complaint?" "Not at all, I like it." She kissed him softly. "I like remembering why we fell in love in the first place, too." The autumn progressed beautifully, with clear skies and mild temperatures. Samuel and Sarah worked together to prepare for winter and for the baby's arrival. Sarah sewed tiny clothes and blankets while Samuel built a cradle from pine wood, sanding it until it was smooth as silk so there would be no risk of splinters. In October, Sarah's father came out from town to visit. Henry Ashford was a solid man in his 50s, practical and hardworking, who had raised Sarah on his own after her mother died when Sarah was 12. He had been skeptical of Samuel at first, protective of his only daughter, but over the years he had come to respect and even like his son-in-law. "You are looking well, Sarah," Henry said, hugging his daughter carefully. "Pregnancy suits you." "I feel well, Papa, better than I expected, honestly." They spent a pleasant afternoon together, eating the dinner Sarah had prepared and talking about town news and ranch business. Before Henry left, he pulled Samuel aside. "You are taking good care of her," Henry said. It was a statement, not a question, but Samuel heard the approval in his voice. "I am trying my best, sir. I can see that, and I can see how happy she is. That is all a father can ask for." Henry clapped Samuel on the shoulder. "You are a good man, Samuel Stone. I am glad she chose you." After Henry left, Sarah seemed especially cheerful, humming as she cleaned up from dinner. "Your father's visit made you happy," Samuel observed. "It did. I miss him sometimes, living out here. But I would not trade this life for anything." She smiled at Samuel. "Not for anything in the world." November brought the first snow. just a light dusting that melted by midday but served as a warning that winter was coming. Samuel made sure they were fully stocked with supplies, riding into town to buy flour and sugar, coffee and salt, all the staples they would need to get through the cold months ahead. Sarah was definitely showing now, her belly rounded and firm. She moved a little slower, tired more easily, but her spirits remained high. She continued to sing to the morning every day, and Samuel continued to fall more in love with her each time he heard it. One evening in late November, they were sitting by the fire when Sarah suddenly grabbed Samuel's hand and pressed it to her belly. "You feel that?" she asked, her eyes wide with wonder. Samuel felt a flutter beneath his palm, a small but distinct movement. His breath caught. "Is that the baby?" "Yes, the baby is moving." Samuel kept his hand there, feeling another small kick, then another. Tears pricked at his eyes. His child. His and Sarah's child, alive and growing and already making its presence known. "That is amazing," he whispered. "Isn't it?" Sarah was crying too, happy tears that she did not bother to wipe away. "Our baby, Samuel." They sat together for a long time, Samuel's hand on Sarah's belly, feeling the occasional kick or roll, marveling at the miracle of it all. Winter settled in fully by December, bringing heavy snows and bitter cold. Samuel spent his days tending to the cattle, making sure they had access to hay and water, breaking ice off the creek so the animals could drink. It was hard work, but he did not mind. Every evening he came back to the warm cabin, to Sarah waiting for him with hot food and a warm smile, and that made everything worthwhile. Christmas was quiet, just the two of them, but it was perfect. Sarah had knitted Samuel a new scarf, and he had bought her a beautiful piece of fabric in town. A soft blue cotton that would make a lovely dress after the baby came, and she could fit into regular clothes again. "Next Christmas," Sarah said as they sat by the fire on Christmas evening, "we will have a baby." "Next Christmas," Samuel agreed, "we will be a family of 3. The thought filled him with such joy and anticipation that he could hardly stand it. He pulled Sarah close, careful of her belly, and kissed the top of her head. January and February passed slowly, the winter seeming to drag on forever. Sarah grew larger and more uncomfortable, her back aching and her sleep disturbed. Samuel did everything he could to help, rubbing her feet and her back, helping her in and out of chairs, taking over all the heavy chores. "I feel like a whale," Sarah complained one morning in late February, struggling to lace up her boots. "You are beautiful," Samuel said firmly. "The most beautiful woman I have ever seen. You are a terrible liar, but I love you anyway." "I am not lying. You are carrying our child, Sarah. How could that be anything but beautiful?" Sarah softened at that, reaching out to touch his face. "How did I get so lucky to find you?" "I am the lucky one," Samuel said, and meant it with every fiber of his being. In early March, the weather began to warm slightly, though snow still covered the ground. Sarah was restless now, uncomfortable and eager to meet their baby. The cradle sat ready beside their bed, filled with the tiny clothes and blankets Sarah had made. They had decided on names. Samuel if it was a boy, after his father. Rose if it was a girl, after Sarah's mother. On a Tuesday morning in mid-March, Samuel woke before dawn to Sarah's hand gripping his arm. "Samuel," she said, her voice tight, "I think it is time." Samuel was out of bed in an instant, his heart pounding. "Are you sure?" "Yes. The pain started about an hour ago." "They are getting closer together." Samuel forced himself to stay calm, to think clearly even though panic was clawing at his chest. "I need to ride to town to get the doctor." "I know. But Samuel, you need to hurry. I do not think we have a lot of time." Samuel dressed faster than he ever had in his life, pulling on his clothes and boots. He helped Sarah out of bed and settled her in a chair with blankets and water nearby. "I will be as fast as I can," he promised, kissing her forehead. "You are going to be fine. Everything is going to be fine." "Go," Sarah said through gritted teeth as another pain hit her. Samuel ran to the barn, saddled Chief in record time, and rode toward town like the devil himself was chasing him. The 6-mile ride had never seemed so long. When he finally reached the doctor's house, he pounded on the door until Dr. Benjamin Mills answered, looking annoyed until he saw Samuel's face. "It is my wife," Samuel gasped out. "The baby is coming." Dr. Mills, a competent man in his 40s who had been practicing medicine in Cody for 5 years, did not waste time with questions. He grabbed his medical bag and followed Samuel to where he had left Chief tied up. "I will follow you in my buggy," the doctor said. "You ride ahead and stay with your wife." Samuel nodded and swung back into the saddle, pushing Chief hard on the ride back home. When he burst through the cabin door, he found Sarah where he had left her, but she was breathing hard, her face pale and sweating. "I am here," Samuel said, going to her side. "The doctor is coming right behind me." "It hurts," Sarah said, and the fear in her voice made Samuel's chest constrict. "I know, sweetheart, I know, but you are so strong you can do this." Dr. Mills arrived about 20 minutes later, and Samuel had never been so relieved to see anyone in his life. The doctor took charge immediately, examining Sarah and making her comfortable on the bed. "Everything looks normal," Dr. Mills said, "but it is going to be a while yet. First babies usually take their time." He was right. The labor went on for hours, Sarah's pains getting stronger and closer together. Samuel stayed by her side the whole time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead with a cool cloth, whispering encouragement even when he felt helpless and terrified. "I cannot do this," Sarah said at one point, tears streaming down her face. "It is too much." "Yes, you can," Samuel said firmly. "You are the strongest person I know. You can do this." "I am scared." "I know, I am scared too, but we are in this together, remember. Whatever happens, we are together." Sarah gripped his hand so hard he thought the bones might break, but he did not complain, did not pull away. He would have given anything to take this pain from her, to bear it himself, but all he could do was be there, be present, be strong for her. As afternoon faded into evening, Dr. Mills announced that it was finally time to push. Samuel moved to support Sarah from behind, letting her lean back against him, adding his strength to hers. "You can do this," he whispered in her ear. "Just a little more, Sarah, just a little more." Sarah pushed with everything she had, crying out with the effort and the pain. And then, just as the sun was setting outside their window, painting the room in orange and gold light, a baby's cry filled the air. "It is a boy," Dr. Mills announced, holding up a tiny, squalling infant. "You have a son." Samuel felt tears streaming down his face as the doctor cleaned the baby and wrapped him in a blanket before placing him in Sarah's arms. She was crying too, staring down at their son with wonder and exhaustion and overwhelming love. "Samuel," she whispered, tracing a finger over the baby's tiny face. "We have a son." "He is perfect," Samuel said, his voice choked with emotion. "You are perfect. You did it, Sarah." The baby had a tuft of dark hair and was red-faced from crying, but to Samuel he was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. Their son. Their little Samuel. Dr. Mills finished tending to Sarah, making sure she was comfortable and that everything was as it should be. "You did very well, Mrs. Stone," he said. "Both you and the baby are healthy. You should rest now." After the doctor left with instructions to send for him if there were any concerns, Samuel and Sarah lay together on the bed, their son between them, just looking at him in awe. "I cannot believe he is real," Sarah said softly. "I can hardly believe any of this is real," Samuel replied. "You, this baby, this life we have built. Sometimes I am afraid I will wake up and it will all be a dream." "It is not a dream. This is our life, our family." Little Samuel, as they began calling him, though they would need to come up with a nickname to avoid confusion, was a good baby. He nursed well and slept in reasonable stretches, waking only a few times in the night. Sarah recovered from the birth quickly, gaining back her strength within a few weeks. Samuel found himself completely besotted with his son. He would stand over the cradle for long minutes, just watching the baby sleep, marveling at the tiny fingers and toes, the small chest rising and falling with each breath. When little Samuel was awake, Samuel loved to hold him, feeling the warm weight of his son in his arms, breathing in that unique baby smell. "You are going to spoil him," Sarah teased one afternoon, finding Samuel holding the baby even though he had been asleep for an hour. "How can you spoil a baby by holding him?" Samuel asked. "I suppose you cannot, and I am hardly one to talk. I can barely stand to put him down either." They decided to call the baby Sam to distinguish him from his father. It suited him, Samuel thought. Simple and strong, a good name for a Wyoming boy. As spring arrived in earnest, melting the last of the winter snow and bringing green grass and wildflowers, Samuel felt like his life was complete. He had his wife, his son, his ranch. What more could a man ask for? One morning in late April, Samuel woke to Sarah's singing as usual. But this time Sam was awake too, and Sarah was holding him at the window, singing to both the morning and their son. Samuel watched them, backlit by the rising sun, and felt that now familiar sensation of falling in love all over again. He got up and joined them at the window, wrapping his arms around both Sarah and Sam. "Good morning," Sarah said, smiling up at him. "Good morning." Samuel kissed her softly, then pressed a kiss to Sam's fuzzy head. "What were you singing about today?" "About blessings. About how the morning brings new blessings every day and how we should be grateful for them." "I am grateful," Samuel said. "For you, for Sam, for every single morning I get to wake up to your voice. I am more grateful than I can ever express." "Show me," Sarah said softly, so Samuel did in the days and weeks and months that followed. He showed his gratitude in the way he cared for Sarah and Sam, in the way he worked hard to provide for them, in the way he told them every single day how much he loved them. Sam grew quickly, reaching all his milestones right on schedule. He smiled at 6 weeks, laughed at 3 months, and by 6 months he was sitting up on his own and trying to grab everything within reach. Samuel and Sarah delighted in every new development, every change and growth. The ranch prospered too. The cattle herd grew, and Samuel was able to buy the pigs Sarah had wanted. In the spring of 1880, they added a few sheep as well, diversifying their operation. The work was hard, but it was rewarding, and Samuel loved building something that would one day belong to Sam. On their 4th wedding anniversary in October of 1880, Samuel gave Sarah a gift he had been saving for months to buy. It was a silver locket on a delicate chain, and inside he had placed a tiny photograph of the 3 of them taken by a traveling photographer who had passed through Cody that summer. "Samuel, it is beautiful," Sarah said, tears in her eyes as she opened the locket. "I love it." "I wanted you to have something to remind you of how much we love you," Samuel said. "You and Sam, my whole world right there in a locket." Sarah fastened the locket around her neck and kissed him, as if I could ever forget. That winter was easier than the previous one, partly because they were better prepared and partly because they had Sam to keep them entertained during the long, dark evenings. The baby was crawling now, getting into everything, and keeping up with him was a full-time job. In February of 1881, Sarah told Samuel she was pregnant again. Sam was not yet a year old, and the prospect of having two babies so close together was daunting, but Samuel was thrilled nonetheless. "Another blessing," he said, placing his hand on Sarah's still flat belly. "Another mouth to feed," Sarah said, but she was smiling. "We will manage. We always do." Their second child, a daughter they named Rose after Sarah's mother, was born in October of 1881, a week before Sam's first birthday. The labor was easier this time, faster and less frightening, though no less miraculous. Samuel held his daughter for the first time and felt his heart expand even further, making room for this new love. Rose was different from Sam from the start. Where Sam had been easy and calm, Rose was fussy and demanding. She did not like to sleep, did not like to be put down, and made her displeasure known with a set of lungs that could wake the dead. But she was also beautiful, with Sarah's dark hair and eyes, and Samuel adored her completely. Life with two babies was chaotic and exhausting. Sarah was constantly nursing or changing or soothing one child or the other, and Samuel took on as much as he could to help. He learned to change diapers and rock babies to sleep, skills he had never imagined needing but now considered essential. Despite the chaos, or maybe because of it, Samuel and Sarah's relationship deepened even further. They worked together seamlessly, partners in every sense of the word, united in their love for their children and each other. One morning in early spring of 1882, Samuel woke to Sarah's singing as always. But this time, instead of just listening, he found himself humming along, adding his deeper voice to her melody. Sarah turned from the window in surprise, then smiled and kept singing, and together they greeted the morning with song. Sam, who was a year and a half now and talking in simple sentences, tottered over to them. "Mama singing," he announced proudly. "Papa singing too," Sarah said, scooping him up. "Papa sing," Sam demanded. Samuel laughed and obliged, singing a silly song that made Sam giggle. Rose, hearing the commotion from her cradle, started to fuss, and Sarah went to pick her up. Standing there in their cabin, with his whole family together as the sun rose outside, Samuel felt a contentment so deep it bordered on awe. This was what life was meant to be, he thought. This messy, chaotic, beautiful life, full of love and laughter and the people who mattered most. The years that followed were full and busy. Sam grew into a sturdy, adventurous little boy who loved following his father around the ranch, helping with chores in the way only a small child can. Rose grew from a fussy baby into a sweet-tempered toddler who adored her big brother and wanted to do everything he did. In 1883, Sarah became pregnant again, and in early 1884 they welcomed another son, whom they named Henry after Sarah's father. Henry Ashford had passed away the previous year from a heart condition, and naming their son after him was a way of honoring his memory. The ranch continued to grow and prosper. By 1885, they had over 100 head of cattle, a thriving pig operation, and a small flock of sheep. Samuel hired a hand to help with the work, a young man named Thomas who was hardworking and reliable. Through it all, Sarah sang to the morning every single day, and Samuel never tired of hearing it. Some mornings he joined her, some mornings he just listened, but every morning he felt that same sense of falling in love all over again. It was not always easy. There were hard times, like when a harsh winter in 1886 killed off a quarter of their cattle, or when Rose got sick with a fever that had them terrified for a week until it finally broke. But they faced every challenge together, supporting each other, drawing strength from their love and their family. By 1888, Sam was 10 years old, Rose was 7, and Henry was 4. They were a loud, energetic bunch, and the cabin that had once seemed spacious now felt cramped. Samuel decided it was time to expand, adding on 2 more rooms so the children could have their own space. Sarah was pregnant again, surprisingly, though she was now 33 and had thought her childbearing days might be over. In the summer of 1888, she gave birth to another daughter whom they named Grace. Grace was a peaceful baby, quiet and content, the easiest of all their children. "Maybe God knew we were getting too old for another difficult one," Sarah joked, nursing Grace while keeping an eye on Henry, who was playing on the floor nearby. "We are not old," Samuel protested, though at 36 he was certainly feeling the wear of years of hard ranch work. "Old enough," Sarah said with a smile. On their 10th wedding anniversary in October of 1888, Samuel and Sarah took a rare evening for themselves, leaving the children with Thomas and his wife, who had recently married and settled in a small house on the property. They went into town for dinner at the hotel restaurant, a luxury they almost never allowed themselves. Dressed in their best clothes, sitting across from each other at a table covered with white linen, they could almost pretend they were young and carefree again. "You ever regret it?" Sarah asked, sipping her wine. "Marrying me, I mean. Taking on this life, not for a single second," Samuel said immediately. "Sarah, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. This life we have built together, our children, our ranch, all of it is more than I ever dreamed of having." "Why would you even ask that?" "I do not know. Sometimes I look at you, working so hard, always tired, and I wonder if you wished for something different, something easier." Samuel reached across the table and took her hand. "I do not want easier, I want this. I want you. I want our beautiful, chaotic, wonderful life. Every morning when I wake up to your singing, I fall in love with you all over again. That has never changed, Sarah, not in 10 years, and it never will." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "I love you so much, Samuel Stone." "I love you too, Sarah Stone. More than I can ever say." They talked for hours that night, reminiscing about their early days together, laughing about the challenges they had faced, dreaming about the future they still had ahead of them. By the time they rode home under a sky full of stars, Samuel felt like they had reconnected in a way that the busy routine of daily life did not always allow for. The children were all asleep when they got home, and Thomas and his wife headed back to their own house. Samuel and Sarah went to check on each child, Sam and Henry sharing one room, Rose and baby Grace sharing another. They looked so peaceful in sleep, so innocent and perfect, and Samuel felt his heart swell with love for them. In their own bedroom, Sarah began to undress, and Samuel watched her in the lamplight, thinking about how much he still desired her after all these years. She caught him looking and smiled. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "About how I am the luckiest man alive," Samuel said. "You say that a lot, because it is true a lot." Sarah came to him and wrapped her arms around his neck. "Make love to me, Samuel, like we are young again." So he did, tenderly and thoroughly, reminding them both of the passion that still burned between them despite the years and the responsibilities and the exhaustion of daily life. Afterward, lying tangled together in the darkness, Sarah said, "Thank you." "For what?" "For loving me. For building this life with me. For being the man I always knew you could be." "Thank you for singing to the morning," Samuel replied. "Thank you for being the woman I fell in love with over and over again, every single day." The years continued to pass, bringing new joys and new challenges. The children grew up healthy and strong, each developing their own personality and interests. Sam loved the ranch work and showed a natural talent for working with cattle. Rose was artistic and thoughtful, often found drawing or reading. Henry was the adventurous one, always getting into scrapes and coming home dirty and happy. Grace was gentle and kind, with a particular love for animals. By 1895, Samuel was 43 and Sarah was 40. Sam was 17 and already doing a man's work on the ranch. Rose was 14, beautiful and bright, with several young men in town showing interest despite Samuel's stern warnings to them all. Henry was 11 and full of mischief. Grace was 7 and following her older siblings around like a devoted shadow. Sarah still sang to the morning every day, though her voice was not quite as strong as it had been in her youth. Samuel still woke to that sound and felt his heart fill with love, just as he had that morning 17 years ago when he realized he was falling in love all over again. The ranch had grown into a successful operation, supporting their large family comfortably. They had weathered droughts and harsh winters, low cattle prices and personal setbacks, but they had survived and even thrived. Samuel took pride in what they had built, knowing that he would have something solid to pass on to his children. One evening in late summer of 1895, the whole family gathered on the porch after supper, enjoying the cool air and the sunset. Sam was talking about a girl he had met in town, blushing when his siblings teased him about it. Rose was sketching the mountains in the distance. Henry was whittling a piece of wood with the knife Samuel had given him for his birthday. Grace sat in Sarah's lap, nearly too big for it but still wanting that closeness. Samuel looked around at his family, at the life he and Sarah had created, and felt a peace settle over him. This was what mattered, not wealth or fame or any of the things the world said were important, just this. Family love, a life built on hard work and shared dreams. "What are you thinking about, Papa?" Grace asked, noticing his quiet contemplation. "I am thinking about how blessed I am," Samuel said, "to have all of you, to have this life." "You get sentimental in your old age," Rose teased affectionately. "I have always been sentimental," Samuel corrected. "I have just gotten better at admitting it." Sarah met his eyes across the porch and smiled, that same smile that had captured his heart all those years ago in her father's general store. Some things never changed, Samuel thought. Some things, like true love, only grew deeper and stronger with time. As the sun set and the stars began to appear, the family gradually headed inside. Samuel helped Sarah to her feet, noting that she moved a bit more slowly than she used to, that there was gray in her hair now and lines around her eyes. But she was still beautiful to him, still the woman he had fallen in love with and kept falling in love with, over and over again. That night, lying in bed, Samuel listened to Sarah's breathing as she slept beside him and thought about that morning so long ago, when her singing had struck him with the sudden realization of how much he loved her. It seemed like a lifetime ago, and yet it felt like yesterday. "Thank you," he whispered into the darkness, though he was not sure if he was talking to Sarah or to God or to life itself. "Thank you for all of it." The next morning, Samuel woke before Sarah as he sometimes did now. He watched her sleep for a moment, then gently shook her awake. "What is it?" she asked, concerned by the unusual awakening. "Nothing is wrong," Samuel assured her. "I just want to try something. Come to the window with me." Still sleepy and confused, Sarah allowed him to lead her to the window where the sun was just beginning to rise. "Sing with me," Samuel said. "Like we used to sometimes. Let's greet the morning together." Understanding dawned in Sarah's eyes and she smiled. Together they stood at the window, watching the sun come up, and they sang. Their voices blended together, not perfect but true, celebrating another day, another morning, another chance to love and be loved. When the song ended, Sarah turned to Samuel with tears in her eyes. "Why did we do that?" she asked. "Because I wanted to," Samuel said simply. "Because every morning with you is a gift, and I never want to take that for granted." "You are still falling in love with me, aren't you?" Sarah said, laughing a little through her tears. "Every single day," Samuel confirmed. every single day for the rest of my life, and he meant it. Through all the years that followed, through the marriages of their children and the arrival of grandchildren, through the inevitable challenges of aging and the changing world around them, Samuel kept that promise. Every morning when Sarah sang to greet the day, he fell in love with her all over again. Years later, when Samuel was in his 60s and Sarah in her late 50s, they sat together on that same porch, watching their grandchildren play in the yard. Sam had taken over most of the ranch work, though Samuel still helped when he could. Rose had married a teacher from town and had 3 children. Henry had gone off to seek his fortune but wrote letters regularly, and Grace had married a rancher from a neighboring county. "Do you remember," Sarah said, her hand in Samuel's, "that morning when you said you woke up and fell in love with me all over again? How could I forget? It changed everything." "It did not change anything, though, did it? You had always loved me." "That is true. But sometimes we forget to notice what we have. That morning reminded me to pay attention, to appreciate every day we have together, and I've tried to do that ever since." Sarah squeezed his hand. "You have done more than try. You have succeeded. All these years, Samuel, and I have never once doubted your love. Good. Because I have never once doubted mine either." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set behind the mountains they had looked at together for decades. Their life had not been easy, but it had been good. More than good. It had been full of love and laughter, of children and grandchildren, of hard work and sweet rewards. "I will still sing to the morning tomorrow," Sarah said, "even though my voice is not what it used to be." "Your voice is perfect to me," Samuel said. "It always has been. And you will still fall in love with me." "Every single day for the rest of my life," Samuel promised, just as he had promised so many years before, and he did. Even when Sarah's voice grew weaker with age, even when her songs became shorter and softer, Samuel still woke each morning to the sound of her greeting the day with music, and his heart still filled with that overwhelming love. It never diminished, never faded. If anything, it grew stronger with each passing year. When Samuel was 72 and Sarah was 69, she fell ill with pneumonia in the winter of 1909. For weeks, she fought the illness, and Samuel sat by her bedside day and night, holding her hand, telling her stories of their life together, reminding her of all the mornings they had shared. "You have to get better," he told her. "I need to hear you sing to the morning again." "I am tired, Samuel," Sarah whispered. "I know, my love. But please, not yet. We still have more mornings ahead of us." Sarah did recover, though it took months before she was fully herself again. The first morning she was strong enough to get out of bed on her own. She insisted on going to the window. Her voice was weak and raspy, barely more than a whisper, but she sang to the morning as she had done for over 50 years. Samuel stood beside her, adding his own voice to hers, and when the song ended he held her close and whispered, "I fell in love with you all over again." "Still?" Sarah asked with a weak laugh. "Always," Samuel said, "until my last breath and beyond." They had a few more good years after that. Years of watching their family grow and thrive. Years of sitting together on the porch and reminiscing about the life they had built. When Sarah passed away peacefully in her sleep in the spring of 1915 at the age of 75, Samuel was holding her hand, just as he had held it through all the joys and sorrows of their life together. The morning after she died, Samuel woke from a fitful sleep and found himself alone in their bed for the first time in over 46 years. He got up and went to the window, the place where Sarah had stood so many mornings, and he looked out at the sunrise painting the Wyoming sky in shades of orange and gold. And then, with tears streaming down his face, Samuel began to sing. His voice was old and cracked, not beautiful by any measure, but it was filled with love and grief and gratitude. He sang to the morning as Sarah had taught him, greeting the new day, celebrating the gift of another sunrise. "Thank you," he whispered when the song ended. "Thank you for every morning we had together. Thank you for letting me fall in love with you over and over again. Thank you for a lifetime of love." Samuel lived for another 3 years after Sarah's death, cared for by his children and grandchildren. Every morning, he continued the tradition she had started, singing to greet the day. And every morning, he remembered the woman who had taught him that love was not something you found once and then forgot about, but something you chose every single day, something that grew deeper and stronger with each sunrise. When Samuel Stone died peacefully in his sleep in the autumn of 1918 at the age of 86, his last thoughts were of Sarah. He remembered her as she had been that morning so long ago, standing at the window in her white nightgown, singing to the dawn. He remembered the way his heart had swelled with sudden, overwhelming love. He remembered thinking that he was falling in love all over again. And then, as Samuel took his last breath, he could have sworn he heard Sarah's voice, clear and pure as it had been in her youth, singing him home. Their children buried them side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, with a view of the mountains and the valley where they had lived and loved for over half a century. On the shared headstone, beneath their names and dates, Sam had inscribed a simple message at his mother's request. She sang to the morning, and he fell in love all over again. The ranch stayed in the family for generations, passed down from parent to child, a testament to the life Samuel and Sarah Stone had built together. And sometimes, on quiet mornings when the light was just right, those who knew the story would swear they could hear two voices singing to greet the day, celebrating another morning, another chance, another blessing. It was a love story that had started with a song and a sunrise, with a man waking up to the sound of his wife's voice and realizing that love was not something that faded with time, but something that deepened and grew richer with each passing day. It was a reminder that the greatest romances were not built on grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but on the simple choice to notice, to appreciate, to fall in love all over again with the person sleeping beside you. Samuel and Sarah Stone had lived an ordinary life by most measures. They were not famous or wealthy. They did not change the world or leave their mark on history, but they loved each other completely, faithfully, and with a depth that only comes from choosing that love every single day. And in the end, what could be more extraordinary than that? The sun rose over Wyoming every morning, just as it always had, painting the sky in brilliant colors, promising another day of possibilities. And somewhere, in the eternal morning that exists beyond our understanding, Sarah was singing, and Samuel was falling in love with her all over again, just as he had promised he would, every single day for the rest of his life and beyond.